The father of the Iranian bomb was mysteriously assassinated last week. Is Jonathan Pollard a traitor or a hero? Israel is bringing thousands of Ethiopians home to Israel after decades of waiting. This and a whole lot more right here on the Joshua and Caleb Report.
In a world plagued with anti-Israel propaganda, Hayovel presents the Joshua and Caleb Report, a positive voice of truth straight from Israel's heartland.
In a world of negativity and fake news, every Christian should be connected to the life and positivity that Israel brings to the world. Ladies and gentlemen out there, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. You can subscribe, ring the notification bell, leave us a comment, all that good stuff. We're on podcasting
That's
platforms.
on YouTube, by the way.
That's YouTube.
That's YouTube.
Luke is slowly training me on how all this stuff works. We're also on all the podcasting platforms.
Most of them, anyways.
Most. You can leave comments on the Apple podcast. I know that
Correct.
for sure.
Ratings.
That's right. And Charisma. I know, Luke, that we're on Charisma.
On Charisma Podcast Network this entire year. It's been a huge blessing. Starting January 2021, we will not be on that network anymore. So if you're listening there, you got to scroll up to the top of the page there and click subscribe on whatever your favorite platform is. It's totally free.
And Luke, we also have really good news. We're happy to announce that we're going to be on the Israel TV network. You can find us there. You can look for us there. We will be on the ITVN network.
Very excited to be with you all.
Luke, we have really good news. Yesterday was a big day. A big anniversary.
73 years since the UN voted to partition Palestine in 1947. 73 years ago, today was really the date that I would say springboarded the Jewish nation into existence in our recent times.
Which is huge. I don't know why we didn't have a party. I didn't even know it was the day. I just went through the day
I honestly
like
didn't
normal.
realize it till today either. Today is November 30th, 2020. And yeah, I just realized today that we...
that should be a big day. We need to remember that next year.
For sure.
Celebrate the miracle.
Yes.
On another note, Luke, we mentioned something. As we went off the show last week, we mentioned a name, Jonathan Pollard. Probably to our audience, maybe many of you guys didn't even know that name. Maybe you heard of that name, but if you were like me, you really didn't know a lot about. I'd heard it all the time, but I didn't really know the depth of the story. We're going to dive in quickly into this story.
Well, and the reason, too, is because there is some controversy. Obviously, last week we talked about how he was freed from parole. He's been on parole for 5 years, and he was in prison for 30 years before that. 30 years is a long time. Finally was released according to his sentencing and agreements and everything. And a lot of controversy. Obviously, Israel is very glad that he's released, and he's actually planning to make Aliyah with his wife. But a lot of Israeli journalists and even some politicians saying he should not be treated as a hero. We're glad he was released, but we don't need to make a big deal out of it. So both of us kind of, and you did even more research than I did, but kind of dove into the whole story, and we want to get into that today.
What actually happened? And
was he actually a hero, or did he actually do something wrong?
Yeah, because some people call him a traitor. It's like, so there's a very complicated story.
So what is the story? What did he actually do?
Here's the story. He excelled majorly, really smart guy, he was in Stanford University.
1980s, right?
1980s, went through, and then he went into the Navy. He was asked to be, he was put on as a U.S. Naval Intelligence. So he went quickly up into the intelligence ranks. And then soon after he was high up in the intelligence, U.S. Navy, he got information. Now, this is the information he received, that Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Syria had nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons being developed to use against Israel. Now, this is a Jewish man who receives this information as an American citizen, right?
Right.
What do you do?
Exactly. You're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
You're big time stuck. He also finds out that there's ballistic missiles being made. He also finds out about terrorist attacks being planned against Israel. Okay, what do you do? As a Jew living outside of Israel and as an American, and he actually didn't have citizenship to Israel at the time.
Right.
He was Jewish, but had not made Aliyah, hadn't gone through the paperwork to actually live in Israel. It was a dream of his that he wanted to come to Israel eventually. Right. What did he do? Now, this is a really important thing that we have to make note of before we say what he actually did, okay? Before we talk about what he did, the U.S. and Israel have an agreement as allies, okay? As allies, you have agreements.
Yeah, important to clarify. We're talking about allies, not enemies.
Right.
Because there's a huge, huge difference between spying for an ally and spying for an enemy country.
Yeah. So as allies, they were supposed to share this kind of information. Right. If another country was planning attacks, you're in agreement to share. Now, the United States, Luke, we're both Americans. This really shames me that America would hold back this kind of content from Israel in the 1980s. Right. Israel didn't release very big time vital information to Israel on this regard. Now, Pollard himself, and we'll talk about what he actually did. He says, "I've got to share this information with Israel," and he works together with the Israeli high intelligence, and he becomes a spy and begins to give this information directly to Israel. He himself says that his reason is to prevent another Holocaust. Look, the 1980s, that's not even that is so fresh in the memory of every Jewish person around the world. And he stands in position, he hears this stuff coming out of Israel's neighbors. Israel's even a newer country even then, the 80s. He says, no, absolutely not. I have to, it's my duty as a Jewish person to share this information with Israel. And he does. He shares the information, and pretty quickly right off, because he's such a high regard, and he shared so much information regarding these issues that he was found out and arrested in 1985. So that's the quick of the story. As he says, I did this to save my people, basically, from another Holocaust. And I believe everyone listening is saying, what in the world? Like, I would do that, right? Right. I would do that for a nation.
Just to be clear, we have an American citizen sharing vital information for Israel's security with Israel, an allied country, which under Israel's and the United States agreements, the U.S. was
obligated to share.
Obligated to share that information with Israel anyways, and they were not.
Right.
And in Jonathan Pollard's own words, he was trying to prevent another Holocaust.
Of which, who knows, maybe he did.
Yeah.
You really don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're probably not going to know for who knows how long.
Yeah.
A lot of the details.
So what happens? Then what we have is what I believe personally is a very anti-Semitic approach. You have people in Washington, D.C., lawmakers, people that are making decisions. They make an example out of this Jewish man who had given this.
What would be the typical charges and sentencing for something like this? Because obviously it does go against American law, right?
So you have other examples.
There has to be some kind of discipline for it.
There's plenty of other examples, and according to this research I've done, you have 2 to 5 years if you share information with an ally, right? Because an ally is different. Like, you're not
totally different than sharing information
with enemies, right? That makes a legit spy, right? But if there's information you're supposed to be sharing anyway, I mean, obviously it's still spying.
Yeah.
But
very light. Should have been a very light sentence of several years.
2 to 5 years is what you would serve. Now, Jonathan Pollard, he was charged with life imprisonment.
That's crazy.
Or life imprisonment. And his first 7 years was solitary confinement.
7 years is more than the sentence that he should have gotten, and it's spent in solitary confinement, which is unimaginable.
Unimaginable. And then after the 30 years were up, he went into 5 years of parole.
Which during that time, from some of the research that I did, there was so many lawmakers, policymakers, lawyers that went to top officials in the American administration, that went to many, many U.S. presidents over and over and over and over again, bringing his case up to them, saying this is unjust, it's not right. He, even in the 1990s, early 2000s, he served more than enough of his time, and he needed basically a presidential pardon, and no president would do. Even got to the point that very senior U.S. administration officials, many of them advocated and said that he should be released.
Right.
So they had
it just never happened.
Wide support across the American government, and it never happened.
What would have had to happen is he would have had to have a release from a pardon from the president himself, which is ironic to me. Why would President Trump? Why wouldn't somebody like that pardon him? I don't know.
Or George W. Bush.
He is finally released from parole on President Trump's watch, so that, thank God, has happened. But that's after 30 years in prison and 5 years in parole. And his parole, Luke, I don't know if you know how parole works. Literally, you can't go out of your house. He wasn't able to go out of his house from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. That was
he was constantly monitored with a GPS tracking device. I saw something from Israel's last ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, saying he would pass Pollard on his parole walking down the street on the other side of the street, and he couldn't even wave or say hello because that was against his parole. As a government official, government officials were not allowed to talk to them. He was not allowed to talk to them. Very, very, basically like being in prison, just without the being in the cell part.
We're talking about, it sounds like we're talking about some deep behind the bars of, communism somewhere or something like that. We're talking about America and how it related to a Jewish person, and what should have been normal was very unnormal, and it actually would be called anti-Semitic. Absolutely 100% rated as anti-Semitic. It's unprecedented. It does not happen. This is not what should have happened. And now we're just now seeing the release of this man.
And the question is, why didn't Israel do, and obviously they did try to get him released, but why didn't they do more?
Yeah, and I believe it comes to the point, and this is what all the officials in Israel are saying. Even today, they're saying this. They're saying, listen, the changeover is happening in America, most likely, to a Biden-Harris administration that will not be favorable to Israel. It's just a flat fact. It's not going to be as favorable as the Trump administration was to Israel. And they're saying we need to be careful. Don't make a party. They're saying now that he's released, this injustice, really, it's a serious injustice was done to this man. And they're saying Israel should not make a party out of it. Yeah. Because it's going to be seen as though Americans did wrong, and you're going to make America feel bad about this.
Right. And the whole time that he was in prison, one of the, basically the same story as what happens between Israel and the United States for everything else, including building in Judea and Samaria. Right. Every other kind of policy, they're worried about their relationship with the United States. Yeah. So America's our biggest friend, our biggest ally. We have to do what they want. We can't stir the pot too much on this relationship. And so they didn't push harder for his release during the 30 years.
So to me, that's a crying shame to not stand up to the facts, to justice, and to allow such injustice to be done on the name of just wanting to be friends with America and keep that American support. Right. That to me also wakes up the call for every Zionist that's out there, every pro-Israel Christian to say, hey, things are still going on under the radar. We've got to step up our game. We've got to be involved. The Jerusalem Post says this case will be remembered as one of the greatest strains on Israel and U.S. relations. This has been the thing for the last 35 years. This has been like
very public, very well known every year. It's we've seen it for many, many years.
Luke, we're so that to just set the record straight. This is what we feel like is really going on. And
Jonathan Pollard was not a traitor.
Not a traitor whatsoever. By all means, he's a hero, and we believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, he was just released from parole last week or 2 weeks ago, and his wife is very sick. And as soon as they can, figure out medical help for her in Israel, they have plans to make Aliyah to Israel, which we definitely welcome and encourage, and are very excited for them as well. You've probably seen it in the news all over the world, but a top Iranian scientist was assassinated last week. The Persian language Fars claimed Sunday evening that the killing Friday, and I can't say his name, very difficult, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, so he was dubbed the father of the Iranian bomb, and it was he was assassinated last week by a remote assassination. He was driving down the road with his wife in a bulletproof car, opened fire on his car, and this is close to Tehran. Gets out of his car to find out what's going on, and a remote-controlled machine gun and I believe a remote-controlled car opened fire on him, wounded him mortally. He was taken to the hospital and died later. And the owner of the car, when they found out who it belonged to, was already gone from the country. Obviously, no one is taking responsibility for this, especially not Israel or the United States, but there's a lot of speculation. Interestingly enough...
I thought you were going to say, Luke, interesting enough, that how does this coincide? I'm not going to start a conspiracy or anything, but how is it that Jonathan Pollard gets out and then all of a sudden the Iranian guy? No, okay, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's far-fetched, but
did you research on that?
Maybe we'll need to research that
maybe
farther.
Some information from the 1980s.
Hey, who knows?
No, because actually this scientist, and I wish I could say his name, he was involved in a program in the early 2000s. So he's been involved in a lot of projects like this in Iran for many, many years. But a former CIA official has said that he was irreplaceable. And by that, basically, he personally had a lot of information on Iran's weaponization program. He made close relationships with Iran's supreme leader, with the military, with the Ministry of Defense, their security. And if you remember, 2.5 years ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu made a huge presentation. Remember when he pulled the black cloth off all the bookcases? They had 100,000 documents and files that that Israel said they secreted and smuggled out of Iran on their nuclear program. They, according to this CIA official, this scientist may have been the only one that actually remembered some of that information. So Israel gets all the information away from them, and then this guy may have been the only one that actually had the information left in his head. So he was basically irreplaceable. And during that presentation 2.5 years ago in the spring of 2018, Prime Minister Netanyahu put up a picture of this scientist for the first time because he was so secret. They had such a secretive presence around them because they were trying to protect him, obviously. Right. And Prime Minister Netanyahu put up a picture of him that nobody had ever seen before because there wasn't photos on the internet. And he said his name and he said, "Remember this guy's name."
He knew something was coming down.
Interesting. Since that happened, Iran has vowed revenge. They've also said that the weapons used in the attack were made in Israel. They have said that it was done by Israel. And the National Security Committee of the Iranian Parliament yesterday, Sunday morning, approved raising the rate of uranium enrichment to 20%, a degree sufficient for the construction of nuclear weapons. And basically, they've decided to remove all restrictions and oversight of Iran's uranium enrichment program as per the nuclear deal in 2015, which means danger for America, danger for Israel. Yeah. Obviously, Trump already pulled out of that deal because it was a terrible deal. Now, Iran said, we don't want anything left to do with that deal. Joe Biden wanted to go back to that deal if elected president. So it could make things very, very interesting. Obviously, this is really, really set back Iran's nuclear program a lot. So whether it was Israel or the United States or somebody else, hopefully this has set them back so far that they will have a lot farther to go to get to a nuclear bomb. But they have been very bold saying, and obviously it's probably a lot of bluff, saying that now we're just forgetting everything else. No more oversight, no more cooperation with any other countries. We're enriching uranium to get to a nuclear bomb. So. Luke. And since the United States and Israel is the big Satan and the little Satan, that means that they're coming for us.
Yeah.
So look out, especially if Joe Biden gets elected.
Yeah. It's becoming more and more likely, I think.
Well, I have this feeling a lot of our listeners out there are probably still holding out.
They're still holding out.
We got to keep.
We can still keep holding out, and nothing's official yet. It's still not out there yet. Luke, to talk about the more local situation here, we have Israel is actually deducted to $200 million tax revenues from the PA.
Yeah, you may not know this. If you do know this, it's probably because we've talked about it. But Israel collects the tax revenue for the Palestinian Authority
because it's not a functioning state.
They don't have a functioning government.
Yeah, it's just
No, because of Israel potentially applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, the PA decided to cut all ties with Israel back in June of this year. And since then, Israel has, I guess, collected in a bank account somewhere about $700 million for the Palestinian Authority. And potentially Joe Biden got elected and supposedly has sent his office has sent a lot of nice messages to the Palestinian Authority. All of a sudden, the PA saying, we're ready to cooperate with Israel again, and let's start with that $700 million you got sitting there. Israel did vote to withhold the amount of money that the PA would be paying in terrorist salaries into their families, which is something that they decided to do this last year. So that's good. So they're actually keeping $200 million of it, which doesn't mean that the PA is not going to pay those terrorists. It just means it's a good step for Israel that's saying, no, this will not be on our watch, won't be blood on our hands. But the PA has said that a red line that they will not cross is that they will always pay terrorists and terrorist families out of their budget, even if it means laying off employees. And the Israel collects $190 million every month for the PA. So that means they got to withhold about $10 million per month. That PA pays to terrorists and terrorist families.
I still don't get that. It's we have an American country that still doesn't see under Trump they did. Yeah. They did the stop the pay to slay situation that was terrible. Mm-hmm. But under Joe Biden's situation, it's already said.
Well, he's already said he wants to reopen the PLO charter mission in Washington D.C. He wants to renew Palestinian aid.
something just doesn't make sense when you want to pay people to kill people. Like
Americans, do you want to see $10 million of your every month of your tax money going to the Palestinian Authority actually going to terrorists and murderers and jails and their families? It's just crazy.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And to make it even more, we were just talking about the so-called state. A lot of people don't realize that there's actually no such a thing as a Palestinian state.
No.
There's these people that are so-called Palestinians that are actually a bunch of
areas.
They're Arabs from all over the region here. Palestinian, if you said Palestinian before 1948, you would have been talking about Jews themselves.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't know that basic
There's not
piece of
actually
history.
a state with a government. You have a Palestinian Authority, which is a non-functional or semi-functional, I guess you could say, corrupt government with leadership that governs over little hot spots of areas.
To make this really funny, Luke, is the Hamas down in Gaza has just boycotted products from the Judea Samaria Arabs.
Yeah, that's a new one. I hadn't heard of that happening.
I've never heard of
before.
this happening, but people, and this is one thing even about the Trump plan that had made no sense. They want to connect the Gaza Strip and the Arabs in the so-called West Bank, right? The Judea and Samaria Arabs. They're hostile towards each other. You have Hamas and you have Fatah.
Hamas controls Gaza, Fatah controls the West Bank.
Right. And so now Hamas has said, we will not buy any milk
I don't know
products.
how they're helping
And that's
each other.
funny. We're not going to buy milk. We're closing. We're not. It's not even against Israel. You would think a boycott in Gaza would say, we won't buy any more Israeli milk products. No, they're saying no more milk from the Palestinians in the West Bank.
Gaza has so many problems. I don't know how they can even survive under stuff like
So they're just adding to it there. So that's pretty hysterical to me that they're wanting to boycott their own. So that's what the point is. They're their own people, Arab people in the same region.
They can't get it together.
They're not going to get together. So that's tough, and that's God has His ways of keeping things in limbo and not coming together, not working out. As the farms were down in Gaza, they all failed. They tried to take them over. Nothing happened of the farm, like the Israeli farms that were there before. It's just not success.
Josh, some good news potentially with the small communities in Judea and Samaria. I think we talked about it last week, where the government is actually talking about legalizing what they call some outposts in Judea and Samaria, which we kind of have to wait and see what will happen, because it's a lot of legislation that has to be pushed forward.
There's two things at hand, Luke. We have the vote is going out for them to talk about legalizing what they call the hilltoppers, right? All these little communities, they call them the new settlements, new communities that are being built up that are not legalized yet. There's 69 that are talking about being legalized. This is at least the head of the communities of affairs minister, community affairs minister, settlement affairs, however it is, said that he's got his start list is 69 settlements to be approved.
Yeah,
that's pretty incredible. There is one community that actually it's good and kind of bad news at the same time. It was slated. Mitzpeh Kramim was slated to be destroyed. There's 30 homes there that would be destroyed. So that's terrible that 30 homes would be destroyed. But because this is being brought up in the Knesset right now to appeal, that we would get recognition for all of these small communities that have 30, 40, 50 homes in them, that they would be that it's going to be appealed now.
Okay.
That potentially it'll be the slate to destroy will be canceled, and we can all pray that it would be canceled, and that the Mitzpeh Kramim would not be destroyed. Back in March, they made a ruling that it had to be destroyed within 36 months. So hopefully,
and may they be the first of a whole lot of settlements that could be legalized in the coming probably years. But in the words of member of Knesset Bezalel Smotrich, the real test will be in the actions, and obviously we see that for sure. They want to push it forward as legislation in the government. That could take quite some time, and also depending on maybe elections coming up soon and who gets into power. But keep that in your prayers, and hopefully we'll see some new settlements being legalized. Yeah, and as Zakia Nigby, what an all-star guy, I love how he says it. He says as a starting point, we have a list of 69 outposts or as a starting
communities.
Point. That's great.
So that's good. We love that.
Josh, we got to wrap up here, but Israel is about to bring 2,000 more Ethiopians home. And you might be thinking, didn't that happen in the 1990s? And hasn't that happened multiple times? Yes. But there's been several decades where actually parents made Aliyah to Israel from Ethiopia, and their children have not seen them in years and years and years and years. The minister of Aliyah is an Ethiopian lady that was born in Ethiopia, came on an Operation Moses in the 1990s at the age of 3. Now she's the Aliyah minister back in Ethiopia, bringing thousands more Ethiopians home. I just think that's absolutely amazing and so cool. Something else we forgot to mention, Josh, is you are about to be in a movie. Are you excited about this?
Yes, I'm super excited about it. It actually is if anybody's not seen the film I Am Israel, they got to go to IamIsrael.com and check out the I Am Israel film. This will be a sequel.
No, go to IamIsraelFilm.com.
Film.
Because there is an IamIsrael.com that is
and I'm not in that one.
Israel hater.
Good job, Luke.
Yeah, so don't
you got
go
your
there.
Job for a reason.
IamIsraelFilm.com. But the sequel is about to be filmed in the next couple of weeks, or part of it.
It's going to be about the places where God's presence has rested. Go to IamIsraelFilm.com, and I bet you can follow David Kern, the producer,
on Facebook.
On Facebook.
Yeah, I'm
follow
Israel
the
page.
story.
And Josh is going to be one of the stars of the new movie, so watch out for him.
And
might be why he trimmed his beard this week. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. And our state-of-the-art camera crew will also be engaged on
Yes,
that
we'll be very, very involved for
Way
sure.
to go.
IamIsraelFilm.com. Super excited about that, and hopefully the weather holds out for an epic film shoot in the next couple weeks. We got desert. I heard jeeps, helicopters, horses, expeditions. So should be super.
Can't tell you guys too
right?
much.
Yep.
We're going to leave it for that big debut. Yeah.
Look out for that. So follow them on social media. You might see Josh on Facebook. Hey, that would be cool. Guys, send us an email. It's luke@hayuvel.com, joshua@hayuvel.com, or leave us a comment on the YouTube channel. Love interacting with you there. In the meantime, be strong, be courageous, and be the voice of Joshua and Caleb in your generation.
I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac,